Anger is a natural human response. It's a signal, an emotional flare sent up by our brain when we perceive something as unjust, frustrating, or threatening. But the problem with anger isn't the feeling itself. It's what we do with it. Too often, we react in the heat of the moment, saying things we don't mean, making decisions we later regret, and damaging relationships that matter to us. And why? Because we didn't take a moment to pause. When we feel anger rising, our body shifts into a reactive state. Our heart rate increases, adrenaline floods our system, and our brain moves into fight or flight mode. In this state, rational thinking takes a back seat. We become hyper-focused on the immediate frustration, losing sight of the bigger picture. The issue isn't just that we're angry, it's that we're no longer thinking clearly. Pausing is powerful because it disrupts this automatic response. It creates space between the emotion and the reaction. It allows us to shift from reacting to responding. Imagine being in a heated argument. Someone says something that sets you off, and you feel that familiar rush of frustration. Your instinct is to fire back, to defend yourself, to make your point heard. But if you take a breath, just a single deep breath, you create an interruption in the cycle. That moment of pause is where clarity begins. Physiologically, taking a deep breath signals to your brain that there's no immediate danger. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the stress response and helps bring you back to a state of calm. This is why practices like meditation and mindfulness emphasize the breath. It's not just a cliche, it's a tool for regaining control in emotionally charged moments. Beyond the physical benefits, pausing gives us time to assess. What exactly triggered this anger? Is it about the situation at hand, or is there something deeper? Often our anger isn't just about the present moment. It's tied to past frustrations, unspoken insecurities, or deeper fears. When we don't pause, we risk reacting to the symptom rather than addressing the root cause. Great leaders, great communicators, great problem solvers all understand the value of pausing. They know that the first thought, the first reaction isn't always the best one. They train themselves to slow down, to give themselves just enough time to choose their response wisely. This isn't about suppressing anger or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about managing it in a way that leads to better outcomes. Some of the most regrettable words ever spoken happened because someone didn't pause. Some of the biggest mistakes ever made happened in a moment of unchecked emotion. But some of the most inspiring acts of leadership, wisdom, and strength happened because someone took just a few extra seconds to breathe, to reflect, to decide before they reacted. Anger doesn't appear out of nowhere. It feels immediate, like a sudden spark. But in reality, it's a reaction to something deeper. There's always a reason, always a trigger, something that sets off the chain reaction in our mind and body. And if we don't take the time to understand what that trigger is, we'll always be at the mercy of our emotions, reacting impulsively instead of responding with intention. Think about the last time you got really angry. Maybe someone cut you off in traffic. A colleague dismissed your idea in a meeting, or a friend made a comment that rubbed you the wrong way. The situation itself might seem small, but the intensity of your reaction can feel disproportionate. Why does a simple inconvenience or a thoughtless remark have the power to make us lose control? The answer lies in the trigger. Because it's never just about the surface level event. Triggers are personal. What enrages one person might barely bother another. That's because our emotional responses are shaped by our experiences, our values, and even our past wounds. When someone ignores our input at work, for example, the anger we feel might not be about that single moment. It might be about years of feeling unheard, unappreciated, or undervalued. When someone disrespects us, our reaction might not be about them at all, but about an old story we tell ourselves, that we have to fight to be taken seriously, that we can't afford to let anyone walk over us. This is why understanding the trigger is so important. If we don't take the time to recognize what's really causing our anger, we risk misdirecting it. We lash out at the wrong people. We escalate conflicts unnecessarily. We assume the worst in others when, in reality, the real battle is happening within us. There's also a physiological side to triggers. When we experience a situation that reminds our brain of past pain, whether that pain is rejection, disrespect, or injustice, the brain responds as if the original wound is happening all over again. This is why some interactions feel more emotionally charged than they should. The present moment is activating an old emotion, and suddenly we're no longer reacting to what's happening right now, we're reacting to everything it reminds us of. Recognizing this changes everything. When we become aware of our triggers, we gain the ability to question them. Is this situation really as bad as it feels? Or is it bringing up something deeper? Is my anger about this person, or is it about something unresolved in me? These are the kinds of questions that shift us from blind reaction to thoughtful response. Some people go through life completely unaware of their triggers, blaming others for their emotions, constantly feeling like the world is out to get them. But those who take the time to understand what truly fuels their anger gain a different kind of power. The power to step back, to analyze, and to choose a different path. Anger often stems from how we perceive a situation rather than the situation itself. Our minds assign meaning to events, and that meaning dictates our emotional response. But what if we could change the meaning? What if instead of seeing an event as a personal attack, an injustice, or a failure, we could see it as something else, something less threatening, something even useful? That's the power of reframing. Reframing isn't about denying reality. It's not about pretending that frustration, disrespect, or disappointment don't exist. It's about shifting perspective, choosing to see the same event in a different way. When we do this, we change the way we feel about it, and in turn, the way we respond. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone interrupts you mid-sentence. The automatic reaction might be frustration. They don't respect me. They don't value my input. That thought fuels anger, and before you know it, your body tenses, your tone sharpens, and the entire interaction takes a negative turn. But what if, instead of assuming disrespect, you considered another possibility? Maybe they're excited about the topic. Maybe they didn't realize they cut me off. Maybe they have pressure from above and feel the need to speak quickly. The moment you entertain these possibilities, the anger loses its grip. The situation hasn't changed, but your perspective has. This shift in thinking isn't just a mental trick, it's a fundamental principle of leadership and emotional intelligence. The most effective leaders, the most composed individuals, have learned to reframe situations instinctively. When faced with conflict, they don't jump to conclusions, they step back, they ask better questions, they look for alternative explanations. Instead of reacting emotionally, they respond thoughtfully. Consider another example. You send an important email, and the recipient doesn't respond. Days go by and frustration builds. They're ignoring me. They don't care about this project. They don't respect my time. But what if none of that is true? What if they're overwhelmed? What if your email got lost in a flood of messages? What if their lack of response has nothing to do with you at all? When we reframe situations like this, we stop taking things personally. We stop assuming the worst. And we give ourselves the emotional space to handle situations with clarity rather than anger. Reframing also applies to setbacks and failures. When things don't go as planned, our instinct is to get frustrated, to see it as a loss, a waste, or proof that we're not good enough. But some of the most successful people in the world got to where they are not because they avoided failure, but because they reframed it. Instead of seeing obstacles as the end of the road, they saw them as lessons, as stepping stones, as necessary parts of the journey. The ability to reframe is one of the greatest tools we have for staying calm under pressure. It allows us to turn anger into curiosity, frustration into patience, and conflict into understanding. It keeps us from getting stuck in negativity and gives us the power to choose a response that serves us rather than one that controls us. It doesn't change what happens, but it changes how we experience it. And that changes everything. Anger is often a reaction to how we perceive others' actions. Someone cuts us off in traffic and we assume they're selfish. A colleague dismisses our idea and we think they're arrogant. A friend forgets to check in and we conclude they don't care. But what if we stopped for a moment and considered a different perspective? What if, instead of reacting with frustration, we responded with empathy? Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It's about seeing the world through their eyes, even when it's difficult, even when they frustrate us. And the truth is, most people aren't trying to be difficult. Most people aren't waking up in the morning thinking, how can I make someone's life harder today? They're just doing their best with what they have. Think about the last time you had a bad day. Maybe you were stressed about a deadline, dealing with personal issues, or just exhausted. And in that moment, maybe you were short with someone. Maybe you forgot to respond to a message. Maybe you snapped at a friend or rushed through a conversation without really listening. If someone judged you only on that moment, they might assume you were rude, uncaring, or dismissive. But they wouldn't see the full picture. They wouldn't see the pressure, the stress, or the distractions pulling at your attention. Now apply that same thinking to others. The driver who cut you off might be rushing to the hospital. The colleague who dismissed your idea might be dealing with self-doubt or pressure from leadership. The friend who forgot to check in might be struggling with something you don't know about. When we assume the worst in others, we react with anger. But when we assume there's more to the story, we respond with patience. Empathy isn't about excusing bad behavior. It's not about letting people walk all over us or ignoring when we've been wronged. It's about understanding that there's always a deeper reason behind people's actions. And when we take the time to see that, we regain control over our own emotions. Instead of letting frustration dictate our response, we make a conscious choice to lead with understanding. This is especially important in leadership. A great leader isn't just someone who gives orders or sets the vision. A great leader is someone who understands their people, who takes the time to listen, to see things from their perspective, to acknowledge their struggles. When leaders lead with empathy, they create environments where people feel valued and heard. And when people feel understood, they respond with trust and respect. In personal relationships, empathy is what allows us to navigate conflict with grace. When two people argue, it's usually because they're both focused on their own perspective. But the moment one person steps into the other's shoes, the tension shifts. Suddenly, it's not about winning the argument. It's about understanding each other. It's about finding common ground. The challenge with empathy is that it requires effort. It's easy to react with anger. It's harder to pause and ask, what else could be going on here? But that moment of effort changes everything. It transforms our interactions, strengthens our relationships, and gives us the ability to stay calm even in difficult situations. Empathy isn't just a soft skill. It's a powerful tool for navigating the world with clarity and compassion. Anger demands action. It pushes us to react immediately, often without thinking, because in the heat of the moment, it feels like the only way to regain control. But there is a difference between reacting out of emotion and responding with purpose. The former is impulsive, driven by frustration, and often regrettable. The latter is intentional, thoughtful, and aligned with the outcome we actually want. Responding with purpose starts with a question. What am I trying to achieve? When anger takes over, it tricks us into believing that lashing out, proving a point, or asserting dominance will make us feel better. But does it? More often than not, those reactions only escalate the situation, leaving us with more damage to repair later. Instead of fueling conflict, a purposeful response seeks resolution, clarity, or at the very least, personal peace. Think about a time when you reacted in anger. Maybe you snapped at a colleague, sent a harsh message, or raised your voice in frustration. In the moment, it might have felt justified. But afterward, was the issue actually resolved? Did the other person walk away more understanding, or did they just become more defensive? Did the reaction move you closer to your goal, or did it push you further from it? These are the questions that separate emotional reactions from purposeful responses. A purposeful response requires patience. It means resisting the urge to strike back immediately and instead taking a step back to assess the bigger picture. What is the real issue here? What do I actually want to communicate? How do I respond in a way that aligns with my values rather than just my emotions in this moment? It also requires self-discipline. Sometimes the best response is no response at all, at least not right away. Walking away, giving yourself time to think, and allowing emotions to settle is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of control. It's the difference between saying something destructive in the moment and choosing words that actually move the conversation forward. A purposeful response also means knowing who you're responding to. Not every situation deserves the same level of energy. Some conflicts are worth addressing, others are not. Learning to discern which battles are worth fighting and which are best left alone is a skill that saves time, energy, and unnecessary frustration. Leaders who respond with purpose create environments of trust and respect. They don't let their emotions dictate their leadership. They communicate in ways that de-escalate rather than inflame. In personal relationships, responding with purpose strengthens bonds instead of weakening them. It ensures that conversations lead to understanding, not just a series of defensive reactions. This doesn't mean suppressing how you feel. It means channeling it effectively. Purposeful responses take anger and transform it into something useful. Clear communication, problem solving, and deeper understanding. The goal is not to avoid anger, but to make sure that when it arises, it serves you rather than controls you. Most people treat calmness as a reaction, something they attempt to access after anger has already taken hold. They wait until frustration builds, until emotions escalate, and then they scramble to regain control. But by then it's already difficult. Anger has momentum. It doesn't just disappear because we decide we don't want it anymore. And that's the problem. If calm is only something we reach for when we're already upset, it will always feel just out of reach. But what if calm wasn't just a reaction? What if it was our default state? What if, instead of trying to find calm in moments of anger, we trained ourselves to live in calm so that anger had no place to grow? This shift in mindset is crucial. Instead of treating calmness like a last resort, we make it our baseline. We don't wait until we're frustrated to practice patience. We don't wait until we're overwhelmed to practice breathing techniques. We don't wait until conflict arises to strengthen our self-awareness. Calm becomes a habit, not an occasional tool. This is why some people seem to navigate challenges with ease, while others are constantly reactive. It's not that they never feel anger. It's that they've trained themselves to process it differently. Their nervous system is conditioned to stay composed. Their mind is wired to pause, assess, and respond intentionally. They have built the muscle of emotional control long before they ever need to use it. So how do we make calm our default? It starts with the little moments, the way we respond to everyday frustrations. The long lines, the slow drivers, the missed emails determines how we'll respond to bigger conflicts. If our default reaction to small inconveniences is irritation, impatience, or stress, then that's what we'll bring into high-stakes situations as well. But if we train ourselves to remain calm in the minor moments, we condition ourselves to do the same when it truly matters. Breathwork is one of the most powerful tools for this. When practiced consistently, deep breathing isn't just something you do to calm down. It rewires your nervous system so that you stay calm more often. Meditation, mindfulness, and reflective journaling work the same way. They don't just help in the moment. They change how you respond to the world altogether. Another key factor is what we consume. The media we watch, the conversations we engage in, the energy we surround ourselves with. These all shape our mental state. If we constantly expose ourselves to negativity, outrage, and conflict, our mind adopts that state as normal. But if we prioritize peace, seeking out content, environments, and habits that reinforce calm, our baseline shifts accordingly. Making calm your default also means redefining strength. Many people associate calmness with passivity, as if staying composed means letting people walk over you. But real strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself. The people who remain calm in the face of chaos are the ones who hold the most power, because they are not easily shaken, not easily provoked, and not easily controlled by their emotions. When calm becomes your default, anger doesn't disappear. It just stops controlling you. It no longer hijacks your decisions, dictates your behavior, or derails your interactions. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond with clarity. Instead of escalating conflict, you diffuse it. Instead of being at the mercy of your emotions, you direct them with intention. Calm is not something you chase when anger takes over. It is something you cultivate, something you embody, something that defines the way you move through the world. Most of the anger we experience isn't really about the situation itself. It's about how the situation makes us feel about ourselves. The ego takes everything personally. It sees disagreement as an attack, criticism as a threat, and setbacks as proof of failure. And when the ego is in control, anger follows close behind. Think about the last time someone corrected you, challenged your idea, or disagreed with you in a way that made you uncomfortable. Did it make you defensive? Did you feel the urge to prove them wrong, to make sure they knew you were right? That's the ego talking. The ego doesn't like to be questioned. It wants to be seen as competent, respected, and in control at all times. So when something threatens that image, it lashes out. But here's the truth. Not every disagreement is a personal attack. Not every piece of criticism is meant to tear us down. And not every situation that frustrates us is about us at all. When we allow the ego to dictate our reactions, we turn small conflicts into big ones. We take things personally that were never meant to be personal. We waste energy trying to protect an image of ourselves instead of focusing on what really matters. Detaching from the ego means learning to separate our sense of self from the momentary frustrations of life. It means understanding that being wrong doesn't mean we are less than, and being challenged doesn't mean we are under attack. It means realizing that our value isn't determined by whether we win every argument, prove every point, or get the last word. This shift in thinking is liberating. When we stop taking everything personally, we gain the ability to see situations for what they really are. Instead of reacting emotionally, we can step back and assess objectively. Why did this person react this way? Is there something I can learn from this? Does this even require a response from me, or is my ego just demanding one? Detaching from the ego doesn't mean we stop caring. It doesn't mean we let people walk all over us or ignore situations that need to be addressed. It simply means we choose to respond from a place of confidence rather than insecurity. A secure person doesn't need to prove their worth in every conversation. A secure person doesn't let one disagreement define their self-image. A secure person doesn't get consumed by anger just because someone else doesn't see things their way. In leadership, this is especially important. A leader who is ruled by ego will struggle to take feedback, admit mistakes, or give credit to others. They will feel the need to dominate conversations, control every outcome, and protect their status at all costs. But a leader who has detached from their ego, they listen, they learn, they put the mission above their pride, and in doing so, they earn the respect of the people around them, not through force, but through wisdom. In our personal lives, the same principle applies. Relationships suffer when the ego is in control. Apologies are withheld because no one wants to back down. Apologies are withheld because admitting fault feels like a loss. But when we detach from the ego, we gain something far more valuable than being right. We gain clarity, peace, and the ability to handle life's challenges without being consumed by them. Anger follows a predictable pattern. Something triggers us, and before we know it, our heart rate spikes, our muscles tense, and our mind locks onto whoever caused our frustration. The brain shifts into survival mode, narrowing our focus to the perceived threat. And once we're in that state, we operate on autopilot, we react, we snap, we say things we later regret. But here's the thing, just because anger follows a pattern doesn't mean we have to. And the fastest way to regain control in the heat of the moment is to break that pattern before it takes over. This is where pattern interrupts come in. A pattern interrupt is any deliberate action that disrupts your usual response. It's a mental or physical shift that stops the anger cycle before it escalates. It can be as simple as taking a deep breath, counting to 10, stepping outside, or shifting your posture. The goal is to create a pause, a small but powerful moment where you regain control over your response. Think about a time when you were in the middle of an argument and suddenly something unexpected happened. Maybe someone cracked a joke, or the phone rang, or a loud noise outside broke the tension. For a brief second, the intensity of the moment disappeared. That's a pattern interrupt. It snapped you out of the emotional loop, giving your mind a chance to reset. The most effective pattern interrupts are intentional. Instead of waiting for an external distraction, you create the interruption yourself. One of the simplest and most effective ways to do this is through physical movement. When anger starts to rise, do something different. Stand up if you're sitting, stretch your arms, splash cold water on your face, take a walk. Movement shifts your body's energy and forces your brain to refocus. It tells your nervous system that you're no longer stuck in the emotional response. Breathing techniques are another powerful tool. When anger takes over, our breathing becomes shallow and rapid. But if you consciously slow your breath, taking deep, measured inhales and exhales, you signal to your brain that there's no immediate threat. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body and helps bring clarity back to the mind. Another effective method is using a verbal pattern interrupt. Something you say to yourself or out loud to shift your mental state. A simple phrase like, "Is this worth my peace?" or "How would I want someone else to handle this?" can create just enough space between the emotion and the reaction. Some people even use humor as a pattern interrupt. Something as small as imagining the situation in a ridiculous context can break the tension and put things into perspective. What makes pattern interrupts so powerful is that they give us back our ability to choose. Without them, anger runs the show. With them, we create space. Space to think, to breathe, to decide how we want to handle the moment. And in that space, we find the power to respond instead of react. Anger is a natural human emotion. It's not something to be suppressed or ignored. It's something to be understood and managed. The problem isn't anger itself, it's what we do with it. When we let it control us, we act impulsively, say things we regret, and damage relationships. But when we learn to manage it, we gain clarity, self-control, and the ability to respond in ways that align with our values. The first step to mastering anger is awareness. Pausing before you react gives you the space to assess the situation instead of letting emotions dictate your actions. Understanding the trigger allows you to recognize what's really fueling your frustration so you don't misdirect your response. Reframing the situation shifts your perspective, helping you see challenges in a way that fosters growth rather than conflict. Leading with empathy reminds us that people's actions are often driven by their own struggles, not a personal attack on us. Detaching from the ego frees us from the need to always be right, allowing us to choose peace over pride. And when anger starts to take over, using a pattern interrupt helps us break the cycle, creating the space to think clearly before we react. These tools are not about suppressing anger or pretending it doesn't exist. They are about transforming it, channeling that energy into something productive rather than destructive. They help us stay in control, not just of our emotions, but of our actions, our relationships, and ultimately, our lives. Because real strength is not in overpowering others with our anger, it's in mastering ourselves.